before we get into all the details about all the typographic stuff that we need to be looking at when we are designing a website, I actually want to start with looking at just the basic things that concern just one piece of text, and namely what we call body text, which is a paragraph, which is a certain amount of text. And the first thing that we need to think about is alignment. So normally text is left aligned. Oh, and I also have a photograph here, and that will you will understand why I have that in just a little while, because we also need to look at how typographic objects get aligned with visual material. But anyway, to get back to what I was just saying, now the standard way that we usually look at text and think of text is that it is left aligned, and then the right is kind of what we call ragged. Okay. However, there are other alignments, and let's just make a copy of this here and look at the other alignment that we see quite a lot of, which is centered. And then we have another one. I'm going to put that down here and just decrease the page height a little bit. So I just have a completely empty page here, nothing except the text. Another way that text can be aligned is right aligned, and I'm going to talk about all of the issues that surround. Well, this one doesn't have too many issues. Text, naturally, the natural form of text, how it is supposed to be in its natural state, is left aligned. That's the easiest way for us to be able to read the text. These are kind of fancier ways of doing it, and all of them, these two, and then the third one that I'm going to do now, all have issues. So the third one is, when we go here, it's flush left and right. It's what we call justified. So, like I said, this one inherently wouldn't have a lot of problems, but when we come to this one here, so let me just move this over here. Now the problem with centered text, what happens with centered text is that unless it is really wide, unless the text is wide, it doesn't really tend to work. So when we have it like this, then it starts to kind of like get a strange shape. You know, it's kind of coming in and out and in and out and in and out, and very, very busy, and the lines are too short for us to make that visual adjustment to what is going on here. We start to have a hard time reading it. Now, when we make the text wider, then the length of the lines start compensating for this in and out and in and out and in and out, and then it starts to get easier to read text that is centered. But it's still not ideal. Now usually centered text works better when the font is size is slightly bigger, and then we open it up even more, because then what happens is that this here, this in and out and in and out on both sides, starts to get a little bit more pronounced. We can differentiate it better, our eye can differentiate it better, and then it becomes even easier to read. But if I just go back, I can go back one more. This was it, I think. Yep. If we have it like this, this would become quite difficult to read. That's the first issue. But the second issue is that with all centered text, regardless of whether it looks like this, whether it's narrow or whether it's wide, we usually have a really hard time putting visual material next to it. So right now, the way that I have opened it up, I actually have a shorter line here, so I have a more of a definition here. So this is actually a pretty good width for this text. But let me just move this down here. Now if I were to take a photograph and put this next to that text, like so, you would start to get a really weird relationship. Now on the one hand, with the text you have the in and out, but then the photograph is completely straight. So usually with centered elements, with centered typographic elements, the only option that we have of using them together with visuals, let me just move these away a little bit so that I get more space here, is to align them from the middle. So when you have centered text, really your only option of putting the visual material correctly in relationship to that text is from the center. Putting it on the left or putting it on the right is not going to work, because you're going to start getting a very strange visual relationship between the straight hard line of the image and the curly nature of this in and out text. Now when we have the left aligned text, we don't have that problem, because then we have a very natural relationship, straight line, everything is working together quite beautifully. But with the centered, then we start to have a problem. And since the centered text also has this kind of in and out sort of organic shape on both sides, usually what tends to work is if you have like a circle, so I just picked this here and I can't really move this around. If you have a circular form above a centered piece of text, that tends to work even better, because then this here is then repeated here, sort of. You have this kind of shape here, and then that's repeated here, so you end up getting a better relationship when the image is actually rounded. Now, so those are the main issues with centered text. So a lot of people like to use it, and in websites it is also sometimes you do have to use it, because you only have one piece of text and your layout is centered, and so you want to make it as wide as your page, for example. Let me just do this here. So yes, there's a usage for them, but you have to be aware that they carry problems. They inherently have problems that have to do with, first, the form. So when I make it wider, I made it very wide now we are actually getting a nice form here. So this actually looks quite nice. But if I were to go back to this, then I'm losing that nice form. I'm getting a rag, and then this no longer looks very nice. But then the other big issue, again, I'm going to repeat this. I know I'm repeating myself, sorry about that, but these are important topics. It is very, very difficult, in fact it is impossible, to align centered text with a photograph in this way or on the other side. If you're using centered text, your only option is to place your visual material, whatever it is, above it or below it and center it. It should be centered. So now let's get to the right alignment. With photography usage, there are no problems. You would just put the photograph on the right and the text on the left. If you do it like this, then this is not going to work out very well. You're going to have the same issue that you had with the centered text. You have a rag here, this is ragged, and this is straight, and then you start getting a very strange negative space here. So you would put it on the right of the right aligned text. Oh, and also, just to do this, if you have left aligned text, then the opposite is true, of course. Then you wouldn't put the photograph on this side, you would put it on this side, so that you have the nice parallel straight lines, because if you put it over here, then you don't have the nice straight parallel lines. Okay, now let's get back to the right aligned text. What are the problems with that? What could the problems with that be? Well, one of the problems is that usually the final sentence of the text of your paragraph is going to end with a full stop, or in this case, in fact, 3 dots, but let's just change this and make this just one full stop. And if I click out, then what happens is that you don't actually have a completely straight line, because wherever you have a comma, here, here, wherever you have a dash, wherever you have a dot, the text is actually going to look optically unaligned, because the actual character is a little bit inside, because it has to make space for the comma. So the straight line that you get with your left aligned, right aligned text is never going to be as straight as the one that you get with your left aligned text. So if I were to zoom in here a little bit, you will see that very clearly. Here it still goes in and out a little bit, but it isn't completely straight in the sense that this is straight. And that is one of the things, one of the issues with right aligned text, which is that it doesn't give you a completely clean straight line on the right hand side. Now, if this weren't web design, if we had more options, and you can, I think, I'm not sure exactly, but I think there are certain CSS code snippets that you can actually do this with. But there's this thing called Roman hanging punctuation, with which you could actually correct that if you were doing typesetting in another software, like InDesign, for example. But with on Wix, there's no way to do it. Their CSS isn't capable of doing that. Most platforms, CSS isn't capable of doing that. In fact, I can't even think of any that are. But on the web platform, this issue with the commas and the dots and the fact that they make the text go a tiny bit, but enough to be disturbing, in and out, remains. And so probably the smartest thing to do is to stick with left aligned text, and then have your images be on the left of that. So now let's get to the final one, which is something that a lot of people like to do, which is justified text. And justified text has huge problems, because when you justify a text, then it sticks to the right and the left, and that means that you start getting white areas inside the text. So we have one right here, we have one right here, we have one right here, we have one that goes across 3 lines right here, we have a huge one down here, then we have big gaps between these words. And in English typesetting, these are called white rivers, and these are things that we want to avoid at all costs. Now, there are 2 ways of avoiding them. One of them is your line would have to be so long that there's enough space for the software to calculate this in such a way that you no longer have the white rivers, but you still, even with a line this long, you still have them. I have it here, I have it here, I have it here. So here we still have a lot of spaces. I no longer have a white river that goes across sentences, lines, which is good, but I still have a lot of spaces between some of the words. If I make this even wider, then that will probably fix itself. So if I make it as wide as this, then the justified text is working beautifully. We no longer have the gaps, we no longer have the white rivers, and everything is fine. The second thing that can be done is to reduce the point size. And you would be reducing the point size to the point where you no longer have the white rivers, and that would be quite small. So we're going to do it now. Look, I went from 22 to 18, and the font has gotten much smaller, but I still have the gaps here. I still have the gap here, the gap here, the gap here, here, everywhere. So I would need to go even smaller. I would need to go down to 16. I even have it still with 16. Look, I still have a white river here. I still have a white river here. I still have big gaps here. So this would have to become even smaller. Once we get to 15 points, then we seem to be okay. So if you are using justified text, you only have two options. One, it has to be very small, which on the internet is not a good idea, because it's very tiring for the eyes for people to read text in very small sizes. Or do the first thing that I did, which was to make it really wide. If you make it really wide, then that will work, but it really has to be wide. But then we start getting another problem, which is that when you have very long sentences, it starts getting very difficult for people to be able to read them, because the way that our eyes work, we can only read a certain amount of characters on one line, and then we get tired. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's something like 70 characters, I think. Anything that goes above 70 characters, or 70, 75, something like that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever. If you count it, 70 will probably kind of end up somewhere around here, is my guess. So if you have something this long, then people are going to have a hard time reading it. So that's the other thing that you need to be aware of. So these are the essentials that I want to talk about when it comes to typesetting. There's more, of course, but those things are quite difficult to do on the internet, such as, for example, wrapping text around an irregular shape. So let's say, for example, if we have a shape like this here, and I wanted to wrap text in such a way that it goes around this text, that can be done quite easily in design programs like InDesign, for example, but it would be very difficult to do it here, because you would have to do it yourself by hand, by kind of like just going down. So here, for example, we already have the first problem. So you would probably, what you would do is do this like so, and then like this, and then here you would be inserting a break and coming down, and da da da, and then you could probably wrap the text around a photograph like this. However, what happens if you change your mind? What happens if you do this and then you decide to do something else? You decide to move the photograph or the text, then you're in big trouble, because you would need to go back, and that's a lot of work. So what I would do if I were you, if you want to do this, let me just move this over here. Let me delete this. Before you do this, take a copy of this text. So just put it aside, put it on that library page so that you have it, so that if you want to go back, if you change your mind, you always have the option to do that, and then start doing the trimming like I was showing you a minute ago. So if you do it like that, then I mean, it's busy work. It'll take you some time to do it, to get it right. But if you want to, I guess you can do that as well. Okay, so this was it for alignment. And then next we're going to look at type hierarchies, and then we're going to get started on actually looking at what sorts of things with typography we can do on a website.